Hello, I'm Morris Kochanski, Wilderness Living Skills and Survival Instructor. The topic here is a activity which is the carving of a stick with the various notches useful in wilderness skills and survival. It's called the Trystick. I'm in the process of trying to track down where I got the idea, which I'm sure was a Canadian Boy Scout magazine. Perhaps definitely before the 50s or whatever. I phoned the scouting movement and I may eventually track down the exact article. But at any rate, back in my deep memories when I began working with the university programs, we had a problem of coming out with something to do. Now we have worked that out a bit because there are many things we have found, folk toys, folk crafts, and so on. But at that time I was stuck and I came up with the notion, what if I have a stick and carve all these notches that you should know? Some of them are practical and functional. Some have got something to do with log construction. So when you build a log cabin, you can understand the notches and how they function. Some are decorative, and the decorative notches are often notches you put into walking staffs and things like that to help identify what you own, etc. And the other thing is that with this exercise, you could also examine and evaluate and test people. So it became a common thing as far as your knife skills are concerned to present a tri-stick with so many notches, and you were graded and took your position in the group. So you get 30 students. The best one goes at one end and the worst one goes at the other end. The other students have to lay down theirs in between, and the best ones get the highest mark, and so on. Now in the most available material, you could go to the lumberyard and get dowling, but we would favor willow in particular that was not too thick or too thin. Now willow here, I'm talking about diamond willow. When willow establishes itself, it grows for quite a while before it establishes an extensive root system. And then if you manage to cut the tree down, it has a lot of energy in the roots and it sends up shoots. And man learned a long time ago that that's how you create the material for weaving baskets. So the first couple of years you weave baskets, and then you get a little bit thicker and you start looking at things that you use for fish traps as well as arrow shafts, perhaps, as other things. So if you let a tree grow for 20 years, then cut it down, the first few years you weave baskets, then you get into arrow shafts, then you get into walking staffs, and perhaps 25 years down the line, these have grown to the extent where they make better than average fence post, you might say. So you might be farming these. These are actually bow staves. They are almost as tall as I am. They have very few flaws, and they have virtually no knots, and I find that I can quickly make these into a bow that is perhaps suitable for hunting small game, maybe grouse and rabbits. It might not necessarily give you the power to hunt deer, I suppose. The ones with special forks, especially if they are uniform, the situation is that you can build many traps that involve the fork stick. The other thing is if you cut this off here and here, this part here has pot hooks carved in it for suspending pots over the fire. So there is about 80, 100 things that you can do with willow that range from chewing on the bark. Here a strip hasn't come off. Peeling it off causes the wood to carve or to cure in a fashion that makes it very carvable. Here we use the bark for binding, and if you treat the bark right here, you can make various weights of cord And in some cases, maybe a quarter this thickness would be sufficient to snare rabbits with, might say. But you can craft an awful lot of things when you have willow available to you. And now in the processing, you harvest it and let it cure. Here I have a stick that perhaps will be about the right dimension for demonstrating how to carve a Trystick. Try and carve it. It's not T-R-I, it's T-R-Y. Also, you have the term tri-piece for girls who have a rectangle of cloth which they do all their various embroideries and alphabets and whatever to display their skill at using the needle. Here we find that our armpit to fingertip is a length, although there is no real restriction there. And that allows us the very first operation in using a knife is to cut through a stick. Now if you nibble, you can only go so far before the knife doesn't want to go any further. And by going around, you decrease the diameter of the stick. Now we've done completely around once. Do it again, and you go deeper. And you notice that as you go forward with a fairly strong, you bend the knife away, and you go a little deeper each time you go around. And if you go around enough, you will discover that the stick will fall off gravity-wise. But experience will tell you that you can go maybe 2/3 of the way through, and you can break it. Now you have a knife in your hand, and it's a common thing that people poke themselves by taking this stick and putting it on the knee and poking themselves. So you either lay the knife aside, usually often you're wearing a sheath, and you rather than putting the knife down, and then you break this. And when you break this, you tend to break it in a variety of directions, because then you'll find it'll be more symmetrical. Here you're left with a bit of a floral pattern. Here you're left with the break. And one of the very first notches is cutting through the stick and trimming the stick so it's neatly presented. You notice even here, because I had a lot of particles, so that would be considered a notch. Over here we have the circumstance that was cut down with a saw, but the corners are kind of sharp. And here's a knife operation that invites injury, and that is drawing your knife is a common thing to take a smaller diameter stick and so you want to cut it. Well, one way of cutting it is to put your thumb not opposite the blade, because a lot of students would cut their thumb that way, but to the side. And as you rotate, you draw that around and around, and just like certain pipe cutters are used for cutting copper pipe, copper tubing, and so on. And you might find that experience tells you you quit after a certain while, and you snap it, and you've got a pretty clean rendered situation. But that is not really feasible on a stick like this, unless you're just only scoring it and you're not going all the way through, because it'll take you a month of Sundays to do that. So here we have the circumstance that we trim the sharp corners. These sharp corners, when they're on the part of a pack frame, I've seen that a sharp corner like that will grab onto a shirt and tear it. Will grab onto some part of clothing. So here you can trim this, but it's not included. This is too fundamental to be included as a notch. Usually I like to make a complete sphere on one end of the stick, but that would be decorative. We're only going to do a few notches. Now in working on this end, you're putting your stick under your arm, or you're working to the side but not over the knee. And if you are inclined to work over the knee, it's only acceptable if you protect the knees somehow. perhaps with a board or whatever. But most operations are carried out this way. And so one operation is a V-notch, which is the simplest operation, and there may be V-notches involved in other notches. But here we're holding it, and we cut a little bit, and we take off a small V. And you can continue slicing like that until you're completely through the stick. But generally, you keep doing this until you see there's a little brownish center to your willow that has a styrofoam in it called pith. And so you may cut the notches. Now this V-notch can be varied. I could make this edge straight down and the other one sloped, or I could make two straight down notches and I take the stuff in between. But at any rate, you realize that you will work through the stick by taking little bits of it off as you progress. And the V-notch proper would be to the center. Well, you can do whatever you want. You can make nicks, and you can make a sloped cut. But when we get to the very center, the distance between the two edges of your V-notch would be the diameter of your stick. And the issue here is not so much as dictating to you what you should do. It's in the development of terminology so that we mutually understand what we're talking about. So basically, you would get two notches, the end stick and the V-notch, and there I can see the little brown center appearing. And that center can be drilled out with a wire, a hot wire, or you could use an insect, the insect that you find in goldenrod, and the insect can eat its way through that styrofoam to the other end to make a pipe stem for a peace pipe, you might say. All right. So there. So there is a whole series of notches that participate in traps, deadfalls, and snares, and other sort of things. Another notch is the hook on the pot hook. Now, if the part here, there's a branch sticking here, I would have 4 fingers or 3 fingers. You get too close to the end, it could split off, and then a pot full of hot soup could scald you or whatever. So you take a certain distance and you carve a hook. And the hook is useful in teaching in that it causes you to have to do awkward things. So here I am working on the point is going to be right there. And I carve about a quarter of the way in. And then I do the other side, which requires an awkward stance, which requires some other way of holding it, because or maybe you just learn to live with this, trying to cut that way, or trying to cut this way. And you discover that in switching over, you now often are asking for some kind of a slip or accident or whatever. But the knowledgeable person will acquire this experience. Now the notch, you can often make a large number of notches, and you got one thing, it takes time. Now all these notches, basically as your skill develops, you're trying to complete the notch within a minute. And there's nothing preventing you from using a baton to do that. Now, when you want to use a baton, you've got to support your stick opposite where the work is being done by a piece of log. And when you support it, then you have to hold this quite steady, perhaps with your knee or your foot. And then you take your knife and you cut your notches like so. And so as a result of using the baton, you may cut this notch in 15 seconds. But that comes later as you master the shape and style, and so on. So here we delineate the hook, and you keep working through the stick till you pretty well have cut through 2/3 of it. When you make the notches, you can choose whatever you wish, but in the training situation, you're trying to explain certain features so that everybody understands what that is about. Now we've delineated the hook part. Now we're going to create the throat. And 1 diameter away from the tip or thereabouts, or even further, we start to nibble away the material so that it will be such that it will engage the handle, the bail of the cooking pot. And you know that you're getting there, that you're creating a sufficient hook, because it's easy to dislodge your pot if the hook is not sufficient. And there's an acid test that the issue is you hang the pot full of water, well, not a big pot I suppose, but got some weight to it, and give it a sudden wrench, where you give it a wrench like that. If the pot falls off, your hook is not good enough. It's got to be such that there's great difficulty in the pot bail venurate. So now I have removed sufficient needless to say, I can't even remember last time I do this. It must be years. I'm getting on in years, and I don't do this like I used to do on a regular basis. But basically, you're an instructor level of carver when you expedite something like that in less than a minute. Now I'm cutting the notch down that way so that it will definitely. Again, I see the pith hole emerging so that I know I've gone past generally the rule is you're going to have sufficient strength at going 2/3 of the way through the stick. And so the pot hangs, the handle hangs there. Keeping also to remind you this distance shouldn't be too short or that will break off and then the pot will fall. Probably more pot hooks are carved than any of the hooks or any of the notches that we make here. Now the next notch that we have used a great deal is a hole through a stick. The hole through a stick, if you're trying to make a hole this way, you find that you cannot make holes by rotating a knife blade that is going to be that functional. Usually you have to make a hole by carving out a square or rectangular hole. And when the stick is thick, you thin it down as much as you dare. That means that you thin it down to 1/3 thickness, and then it's relatively easy to continue to make the hole through that. So the issue here is that you take and thin twice the diameter of the stick, leave the feathers on. This begins you on the whole notion of creating feathers, and you actually will be able to use these feathers for blowing up a fire with coals. So there's looks like about 1/4 to 1/3. Using that as a guide, we do the same thing on the other side, so that we create these two faces that are sort of parallel and opposite each other. Now here, don't be working like this. I show you. And you can work faster by supporting an end if it's possible. Otherwise, well, you got to hold it up in the air and perhaps do this. Now, if you're going to light fire with a glowing coal, whether it's a flint and steel piece of tinder or picking a hot coal out of the fire in the morning, if you save such devices or make them purposely. So here I try to remove this by using a small V-notch, and I pop it off. If there's a byproduct, like the shavings from a project and everything, put them to use at a later point. But there I've cut a notch in the right way, and I break it off. And then I have this little clump of feathers. And if I have two, I can save my fingers by being able to scoop up a coal between them. Now it would be acceptable to make a cluster of feathers on some part here and leave them on, because that would be considered a notch. Whenever you cut this way, you find that you can control the back in Finland I saw a carver there. He was using his elbows tucked very firmly into his sides, which I wasn't accustomed to as much, but that was a different method that There we have two of these, and you go up to hot coal and you uncover it, and then using these you pick it up, and when you blow at that coal, this will flare up into a flame, and with that you light your fire. But here we have thinned down our two flat spots. If you do it too thin, the stick will be weakened, and then you will. This is often the hole that you use for one end of your bow drill cord and lighting fire with a bow drill. There, I've cleaned it up, and now we have much less to go through for making the hole. And generally, for the suggestion in the instructional situation, the hole should be 1/3 of the distance, a square. And I take a light line that use as a guide, and then I go 1/3 of the distance and make another one. And now we will take out a square bit. There are 4 corners to that hole. And because of the grain, as we all are aware, when you're going with the grain, you split this stick. Well, cut across the grain on the 4 corners. And here comes an operation which invites some danger, in that you got to be sure you don't slide down your knife. And you don't rest your knife on anything like this. You rest it on something solid, or have it under your armpit. And when I go in the one corner, I wiggle and jiggle till the blade buries itself up to the other corner. Then I go and I reverse the knife, and I wiggle and jiggle. And I do this on 4 corners. And you notice that I can't just push. Otherwise, I'd have to pound on my knife as if I'm driving a nail. But if I wiggle and jiggle like this, then my knife goes deeper and deeper. And I'm holding my knife, pressing it into my palm like so. I'm not holding it like this, where I have to grip it to keep from sliding. My palm keeps a hand in place. And then I flip. And then I put my knife tip in parallel, perhaps at 45 degrees, and I pop out a piece of wood out of that square, in grain with the wood. And I do the both sides, and I might actually see the pith hole at this point. But to continue on to the other side would be making the hole too big, so we now transfer and we make the 2 holes meet. When the hole is made on the handle of a bow drill, it's got to be kept relatively small so that when you use a bulky knot, like a slippery figure of 8, it doesn't, the cord doesn't pull through. There we're prying out that and we see daylight. We see, and then we're taking our tip, we clean out the hole precisely. The hole's got to be big enough. If you're presenting it, there's no real restriction if you know that you've got to keep your hole size down to, if you're using a paracord specifically. And that's how to make a hole through a stick. Basically, clear that you can thread something through and there's no fuzziness. Now this plays a big role in many constructions. The third one, and the final one for this demonstration, is what is known as the end knock. You know, if you can visualize the end of an arrow where the string goes, and the other end of the arrow to place the arrowhead, well, for a stick this size, this would be for, well, we have an arrow shaft here. We leave a little bit of a handle. We cut a V-notch down about 1/3, so when I cut 2 V-notches, the space in between the two V-notches are the thickness of your arrowhead. And so you make those directly opposite, and then you decide how far down things have to go, and a very light V-notch plus a little bit of assistance with a knife tip. And then do the same on the other side, and this is 90 degrees to the first V-notches you made. And then there is a variety of approaches to breaking out that wood. The one for something this small is to put the knife there and then pry it till you see the crack go up to that second notch. You'll see this in bigger, but here we're demonstrating it in actuality. So you've made all the notches, and to remove the wood you go back and forth, and you have created that effect. You clean up the thing a bit. So here's what we're going to do it in larger size, which is a greater challenge. So the first 2 notches, they're V-notches, shallow V-notches that go about, well, maybe we'd even say almost 1/3 of the way through the stick. If you use a knife a great deal and the knife handle is not right, you will find that the skin on the palm of your hand will start to separate, delaminate, and it become, or you can work up very serious calluses here and here, and you can work up water blisters if things are not right. And that's connected to your knife handle. If your knife handle isn't like this, smooth plastic or smooth wood, right away, and there's some people figure that a knife should have a very grippy surface, so they rubberize them and do things of that nature, and you discover you can't work with that. 1 V-notch, make the other V-notch directly opposite. You always have to have a bit of a handle on the end of your stick that when I broke this out, that I had to have enough of a little bit of leverage. So you can see I left quite a bit there to be able to crack it out. If it's too short, it'll give you problems. If you bring these 2 V-notches too close together, you'll have to use your knife to initiate the splitting, or else you'll likely break the stick across 2 V-notches. Now there are probably 50 notches that I'm aware of that would be practical, or they might challenge your ability as the knife skill in your knife skill development, or they might be decorative, or there might be some other use or application. And I would make the hook and the hole through the stick and this one mandatory. Then students could choose anything they like. They're also given the opportunity to invent notches. Then you decide how far you want that to go, and your notch here basically is as wide as the wood that's left there, this notch. And we do the same on the other side. Now, you want to know where you go in your training. In many programs, you carve a tri-stick and hand it in for evaluation, and that's what it is. But if you're going to become an instructor, you choose your favorite 10 notches. One notch may require 15 seconds, another notch 1 minute and 3/4. But you should be able to do those 10 notches in 10 minutes. And that's to prove to yourself that you've graduated. It's not for me you do this. It's for yourself as a skilled person in the area of developing your skills so that you're not embarrassed when you're the instructor and you have cut yourself, or you're the instructor and a student can carve something faster and more neatly than you. Now, when things are strong enough, we have a technique we use by pounding to make this break, because you have to make the split from here to here. One way to make the split is to use your knife, but this wood is so cured that's difficult to do. So we will see if we can pull off. You will have breakages, but after a while you will get the hang of things. And I'm trying to make both V-notches about the same. Okay, at this point. Now if I put the touching on some support right at 90 degrees to those two V-notches, and if I hit this end in the right way, I'll make the split. And the way you make the split is to listen for the snap. All right, so I can support this right opposite the V-notch. This one here is parallel. The break is going to be parallel to the floor. Then you either take your heel of your hand and you pound harder and harder until you hear a snap, or you can take your baton and do the same thing here. And you do it harder and harder, because if you take it too hard off the bat, you'll just ruin everything. There, I heard a bit of I thought I heard a bit of a snap. Well, we'll check it later. This thing's bouncing around. That's pretty tough stuff. Well, if we feel that we, now we'll just hit it harder. You can see that over here we've had a disaster. All right, okay, there we are. I hit it hard enough. I see the splits coming down. And I might take my knife and do the two corners, there's 4 corners here again, do this to help it split for sure. Again, you're cradling your handle in your palm, so there's no chance of slippage as you bear down, and then you're wiggling in order to get some depth. So there, and so now we can, notice I'll do it from both sides. Whoops, and there we have a undesirable continuation of the split, which generally happens. So there's 2 things now. It's time to quit. That broke off, and that split a little further than I intended. And a little bit of a cleanup, and that's the end knock. Now if I do that on 2 ends, if I have a curved stick actually, and I do it on 2 ends, I've got a means to reel up things. I can make a very by making this pointed and so on, I can make a netting needle. So if I was using this stick here, well, this is the way to reel up string or for netting. You could actually make a netting needle very quickly this way. There's the cut. If you wobble your blade a bit, you'll go deeper and go through a thicker stick. All right, so now we see how quickly, so it takes minutes. Well, I can carve a netting shuttle like this in 5 minutes. So theoretically this should take 2 minutes because you're using, but then again you may not have this beautiful wood for carving netting needle, but you will have this wood for making the shuttle. If you're working with green wood, you'll find that it's so you've got you do the same thing on this end, and then you take this end and go like this. You'll find it'll be a very passable netting needle. At any rate, we have done the 3 notches. Well, 4 actually, because we one notch was trimming the end of the stick, cutting through a stick and trimming the end. Sometimes we put a hole through all 3 and put a pin in there so that we have a hinge. And here the vibration of trying to break that caused this to break because there was a V-notch. There wasn't very much wood holding there, and so on. So we got the issue there. Now some students will actually make a fence post and carve these with a hatchet, but that would probably also be a valid exercise in developing your skills as a hatchet user. Now we'll do one more notch, and that will be the issue of the most common notch for log construction. So I want to build a small cabin, and of course you would do that with an axe and saw perhaps, but here you are learning your knot terminology. So here is the V-notch. It goes pretty well to the center. So with an axe, you very quickly make this notch. And on the other side, you there. And the part that engages it, like this, is chopped up with the axe, like so, until this part fits in there like so. And you keep doing that until it's halfway into this log and halfway into this log. So for example, this part here would have been done on this side. So the complete notch is straight down to the center And then over here, it's scooped out. So it's done very quickly. Well, the notches in a log construction is to put up walls so that they are stable and that they fit. So this is one of the quickest ways to make the notches. And so the next log would have the V-notch that I could have demonstrated, but I broke it off because I made it too close to the other one. At any rate. So there must be about a dozen notches you'd have to know and apply to build a log house, log cabin. And that is the function of the Trystick. So you now have an idea. There is places where the directions for all the different notches have been published, because I wrote that many years ago, a very detailed account for about 20 notches.